Hello there, many thanks for joining us on our Monday Business News Report. It's now time to bring you the feature on the show today. Now, one of the highlights of the week that was the report from the World Bank, which says Nigeria may have one of the highest inflation rates globally this year and the seventh highest among Sub-Saharan African countries, with the increase in prices diminishing the welfare of Nigerian households. The bank further highlighted the adverse effect of inflation on Nigeria, which include pushing 8 million Nigerians into poverty and the possible disruption of consumption, investment and saving decisions, among other consequences. The inflationary pressures also being generated by multiple demand and supply shocks arising from disruptions of supply chains linked to COVID-19 and associated containment measures have also eased, but security issues, border closures and limited access to markets continue to also fuel inflation. The current mix of monetary, fiscal, foreign exchange and trade policies also play a prominent role as a driver of inflation today. Trade and foreign exchange restrictions, including closure of land borders, started in August 2019, have also increased the prices of food items and consumer goods, as well as imports of over 40 goods, including many staple foods, which are currently ineligible for foreign exchange through formal windows. Well, joining me now virtually to discuss this and much more, I have Abel Akeni, the head of research from Budget. Good to have you on the breakfast show this morning, Abel, and a happy new year to you.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, David. Happy New Year.
Now, the World Bank projects Nigeria's inflation rate to be one of the highest to look out for this year. Looking at the 2022 budget presentation, inflation is expected to moderate at about 13 to 14%. How do we tally these two projections, what government is proposing, and then the reality being painted by the World Bank, looking at realities like we're having this year, subsidy removal by half year, increase in electricity tariff, and also the consistent surge in food prices? So many believe we might even have to deal with double the food prices we dealt with last year. Your thoughts on these two realities?
So, indeed, I think the World Bank is right, because if you think about it, since 2016, the country has, or the country's economy has been one of the worst 20 performing in terms of the inflation. And as of last year, we are among the worst 10 countries in Africa in terms of our inflation rate. But if you put that scenario side by side, what the government is projecting, one of the things we would have to look at is how effective have the government's projections been in the past. And if you think about it, since 2019, the government has always missed its inflation targets. And the inflation in the economy has performed worse than what the government has always projected since 2019. If you take for 2021, there was a projection in the budget statement to achieve about 11.9%, but we see that as at November, inflation is still as high as 15.4%. So I won't put much stock in the current projections, especially as nothing is being spectacularly done differently to change the status quo. If I go further to speak about subsidy, you know that historically, subsidy removal have always had a knock-on effect on prices of goods and services, particularly in Nigeria, especially because of the poor power supply. Take, for example, we have over 41 million micro, small and medium enterprises. Many of these small businesses depend on these small generators to run their businesses. The barbing salons, the hairdressers, they all depend on this. And if you hike the prices of petrol, these people will have no cost but to hike the prices of their services. And that will knock on several other goods and services. So we expect to see a surge in prices if subsidy removal goes through this year. And again, the government is not just thinking of only petrol subsidy removal. It's going to be a twin removal, because they'll be taking out petrol subsidies and fully removing electricity subsidies. So it's going to be a twin shock to Nigerians when both petrol subsidy and electricity subsidies are taken out. And this will further affect the inflation in the country. But if we want to really consider the reality, we are in a pre-election year, and typically political parties like to be very cautious. So it will be in a way ill-advised for them to carry out this in this year. Or I'm struggling to see how the ruling political party will balance the demands from the masses vis-a-vis the ambition to continue in power.
Okay,
Because
Abel, if I'm
okay.
important here now, looking at the best and worst case scenarios, what sort of strategies do you think can be explored this time around to stimulate the GDP performance and drastically drive down inflation? For the fact that we still have double digits in terms of our inflation rate, even for the projection from government at 13-14%, this is a major cause for worry, wouldn't you say? How do we begin to drive down this inflation rate and thinking outside the box?
So indeed, I would say it's a cause for concern. But what the government has to do is to identify what are the root drivers of the current double-digit inflation we have in the country, and they are not news to the government. They are aware of this. One of the key drivers is that the country is currently import dependent, vis-a-vis the reality that we have a terrible foreign exchange management regime. So what that means is that someone who is importing at a time when the exchange rate is maybe $1 to 197 naira, and now you have a scenario where it's $1 to about 560 naira. The person is having to pay more for goods and services, and when those services land in the country, they are going to be more expensive than they should have been if we had lower exchange rates. So I would say because of the country's import dependence, we are going to see a lot of imported inflations as long as we continue to have a foreign exchange crisis. So the government needs to tackle the foreign exchange crisis, but it also needs to tackle our import dependence, so that we have limited demand for forex. And one of the quick wins the government can quickly grab on this year to limit the pressures, the importation pressures, is to limit the importation of petrol, because it is one of the petroleum products. Importation of petroleum products is one of the largest imports of the country, and it takes a lot of our foreign exchange and puts a lot of pressure on the value of the naira, and this further leads to devaluation of the naira. So if the government is going to intervene in terms of making things better, creating a scenario where things are better, this will be one of the things that the government needs to tackle very quickly. Another thing that also affects inflation in the country is food prices, and a lot of times food prices will surge if we have poor harvest conditions, poor rainfall, poor storage facilities, which often lead to post-harvest losses, and even poor harvest in the first place. And then when we have these types of scenario, the reality remains that the little food that is produced in country becomes more expensive than it should ideally be. So if this is one of the causes, or it's one of the root causes of the current inflation the country is experiencing, something needs to be done to improve harvest condition, maybe through further or larger investments in irrigation, larger investments in storage facilities to reduce post-harvest losses. So I'll say those are two things the government can quickly do to trash out or try to contain the inflationary pressures the country is experiencing.
Okay.
Over there.
Now, Abel, we're wrapping up our conversation. You earlier touched on the fact that the reality is that this year marks the pre-election season. Definitely, the business climate is expected to be tense in the coming months. Investors are also expected to sit on the fence and cash a little more liquid due to political influences. But what are some other economic markers do you see defining the year 2022 and the prospects for economic recovery?
Okay, David, I would say on that part, if I start with the last part of your question, I would say Nigeria is on the right path to economic recovery. We just got out of the COVID-19 induced recession recently, and I would say we're making gradual progress. But how sustainable is this progress, and how can the country consolidate on that? That's the big question, especially if you consider the reality that the economy, the growth rate of the economy is almost similar to the growth rate of the population. So in terms of what the economic markers would be, or what the government can do to consolidate, I would say the government needs to very rapidly contain the population growth rate or very rapidly accelerate the economic growth rate. Because if we have a scenario where both of them are performing at the same rate, we won't be able to lift as many people out of poverty as the country ideally should. And as you mentioned, again, investors will certainly sit on the fence because there are a lot of policy uncertainties. Investors are not certain if the incoming administration in 2023 will carry on with some of the policy priorities of this administration, especially the National Development Plan, which requires investors to put in about 300 trillion. That's about 60 trillion per year between now and 2025. What's the guarantee that the next administration from 2023 will continue with that policy priority? So I agree that investors will continue to sit on the fence, especially because of this uncertainty surrounding 2023.
Exactly. Thank you very much for your time on the Breakfast Show this morning. Abel Akane, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And one of the biggest concerns for the everyday Nigerian and driving inflation as well as also insecurity. We need government to attend to that with a different approach that would yield more results. We need to see better ease in the economy. Thank you once again for your time and a happy new year to you.
Thank you, David.